All right, here we go. Welcome to another episode, and we're going to be going over how I made this image right here. So let's jump into it. All right, so we have another sketch. The sketch, as always, is just a quick way to get our direction going, and I'm toning down the canvas. Now, it's important for me to tone the canvas down. Why? Because that white is just really distracting. So I start with this base coat of this strong yellow. It's going to be a color that really is going to control a lot of the color palette here. I start with the sky, and I'm just starting to basically outline the silhouette of some of the mountains and put in some quick indication on the ground plane. A little bit of color vibration, warms and oranges, pushing those greens as well. And now let's start creating this rock formation that's going to be sitting in the background. Now the rock is a pretty basic design. There's a top plane and a side plane, but I want to make where the form breaks a really interesting shape. So I'm really trying to push that shape language there. And I'm brushing in a little bit of texture, the same brush that I'm using for the ground. And now working behind the layer to just get in that front face of the rock plane. Now this is where I want to make it a bit interesting. The goal here is really for me to push a lot of color. And I'm using this subject matter of a knight and dragons as my sort of generic theme, but I'm really focusing on compositions and just color. So as I'm playing around with different brushes, I'm using the brushes to help visualize a design. This rock formation, I want it to be kind of destroyed and has a lot of damage, has a lot of weathering to it. So that's my goal is to make it interesting, to create visual interest. For a concept artist right now, my point is to create visual interest where if a person is watching and looking at this scene, they are not just compelled by one element of the characters or whatever, but there's a lot of compelling elements in the scene to keep a visual interest where when the eye travels around to see and look at all these details, the information that creates this world. So now that I'm adding in more damage, more decrepit sort of weathering on this rock face, I'm also adding different indications on the top plane. The top plane is also a surface of the rock that should have a bit of damage as well. So I'm really going to play around with that. As I'm developing this, it keeps getting darker and darker and darker. So I have to keep in mind that I'm going to be adjusting the values, especially towards the ground, where there's going to be a lot of bounce light that's probably going to travel up. As I do that, that's what we're kind of looking at right now. Now I'm placing some rocks. I have this rock brush that's pretty fun. And it's just there to help me outline and basically lay out before I really push design, just lay out where the rocks go. Now I'm also paying attention to the sketch. Where the sketch is, the dragons and the characters, I want to just keep in mind that I'm designing the ground plane with the placement of those characters in mind, because I don't want to put all the cool stuff where the character is going to cover it up, right? It would be kind of pointless. So I'm just putting in some more details. I love working on the background first. I love sort of what I like to say, create the stage of where the characters would be now acting. So I like to really work on that first. But again, I always want to keep in mind where the characters are going to be in a scene like this. Whether it's an acting keyframe, something for like a movie, action, or even video games, there's always a play of characters, so and a narrative, some storytelling elements. Now let's pump up some shadows. I have some shadows on the ground. This really saturated, nice looking sienna, this brownish orange. And as I started to develop that, I'm like, wow, okay, that looks pretty cool. It was sort of an experiment, And something about painting and the thing about knowing a good process is that it allows you to rely on the process and do experiments. And sometimes these experiments that come out are really, really rewarding. And so, why why are we doing so much work? Why do we do so much repetition? It's really to create that process that you have a very solid safety net, so then you can explore creatively, you can explore with more fun, with more excitement, because you have the techniques and you have the process to rely on. All right, now I did this thing here where I put on a new layer on lighten, and I pumped up the orange reddish saturation in the shadows. Started to like how that looked. It feels like a lot of bounce light coming through. It looks kind of nice. So I want to keep that there, and it now becomes a little bit of a theme for this piece now, this introduction of this really warm tone. I'm starting to like where it's going. So far the background is working out well. I'm going to be outlining the dragons right now. Each one of the dragons is going to have its own layer, and I'm just putting down the base layer just to act as a way to hold the silhouette. So now I can clip in everything in from that point. Why am I choosing these colors? These are colors that I have on a palette sample. I'll talk about that in maybe another video or something. But colors for me, I like to create some of these palettes, some of these mosaic samples where I can kind of sample from, and I start to work the balance in the painting. And so let's experiment with that. Now compositionally, it's kind of an odd piece. I was really experimenting with the composition here, where the nose of all three dragons are oddly lined up. Almost like if you're watching like a soccer game or a football game, where all the players are lined up on a line, this invisible line that's on the field. And it kind of feels like this really strong, tight confrontation line. Normally there'd be this idea of, stagger them, foreground, middle ground, background, get overlaps. But for some reason, I wanted to experiment with composition in a way that I normally don't, And this is a fun way to kind of do that. All right, these dragons, combination of, from my research, a Komodo dragon and a black water monitor. It's this really, really sleek looking black lizard. And I wanted to also incorporate some, I guess, dinosaur-esque like elements so like little spikes and things like that kind of run down the spine. Almost like an alligator, but maybe more prehistoric. So over the course of doing a lot of these studies, I started to just combine these different designs of all these different lizards and dragons and such to sort of create a fun evolution of how to create these. So piece after piece, these dragons have sort of evolved. Now, that base tone, that green, I'm using just black now and sort of darker values to create the form of that dragon, right? The base coat was there to kind of set it in value to have a silhouette, but now all the darks are really creating the form of everything. Now, it kind of looks like there's a little bit of light because the bottom part of the form is in shadow. But now I can actually add in more carefully applied lit light, lit areas on the surface now to make it a little bit more appealing. Maybe bring a focal point somewhere. All right, now let's work on this front one. The one in the foreground, it's a really close-up head, and automatically I feel a little bit apprehensive because it's such a focal point in the foreground, and it also would imply that there'd be a lot of detail on there because it is a point of interest, a head. So automatically I get a little bit in my own brain. I kind of think a little bit too much, and I'm like, oh, this has to be good, this has to be done right. Where when I painted the one in the back, it was just more, I didn't have that thought, so it's weird how your mindset can change when you're doing different parts of your painting, right? I just feel like that's kind of interesting. I'm playing with blend modes here lately just to see if I can get some color shifting and color variation. Again, my goal was to sort of use these personal paintings as a way to explore color, Yeah. So some of the brushes that I'm experimenting with, I wanted to get the texture of these dragons, right? The scaly skin, sometimes very I don't know, kind of like polka dots. Not polka dots, but they're very, there's a lot of dots on them. They go from like light tiles to dark tiles in different shapes. So I wanted to try to get that in. And so it was a little bit of a challenge. I ended up going with a strategy of, okay, let me just draw them in a bit, paint some of the form and lighting, but I'll let the drawing sort of really capture the tone, the overall form of everything on this foreground dragon. So that's sort of the direction that I'm approaching it here. I think it's starting to help. I have reference that I'm looking at while doing this, so I'm really looking at some of those references as this is going down. So I think it's working out okay. So far, it's working out. The thing about some of these paintings sometimes is it's not such a linear path. Sometimes you go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and then at 4 you realize, oh man, I need to go back to step 3 and fix this thing. So I'm just going to keep going as far as I can, and then if I see something, I'll address it at that point. All right, now let's get into the more focal point, narrative point dragon. It's the one that's in the middle, right? It's the one that's going to be most engaging with the character. At least that's the point. So hopefully we can make that work. Now, automatically, it's funny. Since it's a little bit further away, I'm so much more comfortable painting this dragon. It's. I don't know if you guys could tell within how I'm actually applying the marks, but I feel a lot more comfortable because it's a bit further away. Odd, right? It's kind of funny how that all works. Let's put in some dragon spikes with some cast shadows hanging down. It's kind of fun because those shadows really indicate where the light is coming from, which is some of the tricks that are fun to use, that help really show lighting in a very powerful way. Cast shadows. All right, let's put in some color variation, pump up the details, give it this glowing dot of a red eye. They look pretty evil, pretty scary. All right, and let's play around with just a little bit of the blending here. Now, so far, what's happening is, when I started with the green of the dragons, I'm just trying to use shadow and light and balance those two with that green. So it's really just about color harmony with that sky tone that I have. I could have chosen maybe like a green or like a blue instead of a green or red. So like a red dragon, that'd be kind of cool. Maybe I'll try that for next time. But then the challenge would still be the same. How do we use the yellow from the sky to kind of create all of this? Now, upcoming at Brainstorm School where I teach, I'm teaching a course, a 5-week course that breaks down this sort of painting process in a more digestible, easier to understand way, where we go from studies to eventual adaptation, where we take the studies and eventually evolve it into something more conceptual like this. We use custom brushes, no photos, making sure that we use a lot of indication for a painterly approach. So if you're interested in that, I'll link something below in the description if you guys want to take a look at that class. All right, same approach. I'm just outlining this character. The character needs a little bit of work. It's very roughly laid in. There's just a gestural sketch. So now, just like with the dragons, after I have that base coat, just that base layer, I'm going to go in with the darks. The dark accents that can really make the design visible. Oftentimes in painting classes, there's like an assignment, to do film studies, right? And film studies, they'll say, oh, just try to use 2 values. And it really becomes about editing down, not really seeing information, but what are the 2 most important values to make a scene visible and readable. Well, the same thing kind of applies here in the same type of same type of mindset, where we're just using 2 values to make this entire character readable and understandable. And that's the point of what we're trying to do right now. We can add in all these midtones, what I'm kind of starting to do now just a little bit, but the darks are what really make the graphic shapes. Now we see the cast shadow under the neck. We see the armors on the thigh, where it meets the knee, all because we separated lights and darks. So I love doing this. I can draw like this in a sketchbook. It's really fun, even with like a marker or a kind of a thicker pen, you know? So we kind of see the direction of light. We see indication of design, and it just completely changed that one silhouette. So now I'm actually going to start painting the armor. I'm going to go underneath that layer, go underneath the layer of the black, and start to actually paint in reflected light, reflected shadows or form shadows, highlights. So it's like a good system. It's a good process, right? And that's the whole point of this channel. It's showcasing process that allows for good, reliable results, that allow for a continuous way to not just develop image making, but solidify a process that you can really, really, really rely on. On my last podcast episode 8, we talked about imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome is often one of the remedies is to have a good, reliable process to things. It's something that you can rely on to be sort of your remedy to attack problem solving. You know, when you don't know what to do, you have that training or process. You know, so check out that episode. It's in the podcast section on my channel. Talking about good topics each week and just doing fun art. All right, so it's like you see the armor of this character is starting to become more developed, more accent shadows, more ways of reflecting the sky tone, and ways of reflecting the ground tone. Okay, so what color is this armor? It's kind of hard to tell, right? It feels gray but green, but there's all this reflection of warm tones on that green, and I think it just looks interesting, right? And again, pushing color is the whole point of this. Let's do some anatomy fixing, throw on some little details. Details are kind of what makes the eye stick to little areas of the anatomy or the character design. Just like the spikes on the dragons, our eye kind of stops and looks at those just ever so longer than anything else on the dragons, perhaps. Maybe we look at the eyes longer. So it's the same thing with this character. As we put little indications of details, it's really about where do I want the eye to slow down, you know? Let's put a shadow in there. Pretty loose, painterly, very brushstrokey. All right. Now we're getting pretty close. We're getting to a point where we've basically painted in 99% of what the sketch was indicating. Okay? And so I'm looking at the painting now, and I want to start adjusting. I feel like the color of the knight and the color of the dragons, they're too close to each other, you know? I also wanted to bring in a sense of the warm in the darks, you know, just like that how we did that with the rocks on the ground. I also want to do that with the darks that are visible in the scene, you know? So I'll pump some of that into the character, into some of the dragons as well, to highlight the spearhead, the thing that makes this a point about confrontation. And again, I'm trying to utilize this sense of tension, you know, like the points of where the knight and the spear meet all the dragons. Now, as I was just looking through this, I had this idea. Let me play around with something where it almost feels like the knight is going to be getting surrounded. You know, he's getting surrounded. So it's not this line anymore. It's almost like this break and getting surrounded by the dragons. I don't know why I thought about that, but every once in a while I get this, I don't know, what seems to be like a good idea. And, oh man, I wonder if I try this. Sometimes those are good, and sometimes those are bad, but you never know until you kind of try. So I'll do a quick sort of application of that idea and then make a decision, you know? Because it's hard to decide mentally. Like, I would rather see it, try it, and then see it, and then decide. It's the best way, I think, in my opinion. And so I'm going to make a quick revision here to attempt to communicate that idea where there's a dragon in the foreground, tail wisping around right there at the end, and we just see the back of it kind of really in the foreground. So let's put the spikes there. I thought it might be interesting if we had spikes kind of in the foreground that overlap some of the rocks on the ground. So we'll try to apply a little bit more information, really try to sell it. It's not looking that good to me because it's very distracting. There's a lot of information there. There's a whole bunch of spikes. There's, let's read of a dragon's shape in the front. So as I still give this its due to try, see how it goes, the more I look at it, I just don't think it's the right way to go. Okay. So, but let me still try. I'm trying my best. Each idea, like even a thought like this, needs to have its own, I guess, like real solid attempt. Because otherwise, then it's just, not really. We're not really trying. After reviewing it, I thought, no, I want to go back to just the head in the foreground. So, yeah. But I want to spin it, maybe just position it a little bit better. And, it's not a lot has changed, but what I did do is shave down a little bit of that silhouette and push it just a little bit more. So this is the end result, everybody. We have the final composition here. Some of the things that I just want to point out that I think are really successful in this piece, because every piece is a learning process, Every piece is a step going up the ladder, and we don't really need to overly analyze, but it's good to just pull out some solid points and some negative points. The negative points may be something that we can focus on as a learning point for the future. Okay, so something that I really enjoy about this is I like the colors. I think the colors really came out nice, and as a focus, with the yellows and the oranges and the shifts to the greens and a little bit of these blues that are there in the greens, I just think that color range is looking quite nice. Something that I also like about the painting is how graphic it is. I like and how indicated it is. I sort of like the stylization of it. Something that I don't like, that I wish I would pay attention more in the future, is I really want to get more confident with painting these lizards. So I'll probably do, or these dragons. So I'll probably do some more studies of those. I want to be more creative with the composition. That dragon in the front encircling, circling the, imagine like a bunch of like lions circling around a prey, That thought is still in my head, so I'm like, I think that might be my next one, or I might do something as a follow-up. So let me keep that thought. I shouldn't kill it in here because it just didn't work in this one. Let me still attempt that in the new one. Something that I also want to try is, it's not a negative point, but I want to try to see if I can be this successful with the colors, but on a different palette range. So I'm starting to think about that as well. So thanks again, everyone, for watching another episode of The Process. We went over this image. We talked about, sort of the thought process. We talked about the steps, and we also talked about some of the mindset. So thanks again. And, just a really quick thing is every Wednesday I'm doing a live stream episode. Please check it out. I have a link to my Discord down below. The Discord channel just basically has also fun daily sketch groups. There's also a critique group, as well as a really fun event section where we talk about the podcast schedule, the live stream schedules, and any videos that just kind of release, and courses and things that I'll be participating in. So I hope to see you guys there. And thanks again for joining. Thanks for the wonderful support. If you guys like this video, please give it a like. Give it, subscribe to the channel. Let your friends know about it. And we'll see you guys on the next one. All right. Take care. Thank you.